And I'd like to welcome everybody here to this lecture talk in the Maynooth Love Data Week series. And we're very privileged to have Leo Appleton, Dr. Leo Appleton, who's the Editor-in-Chief of New Review of Academic Librarianship. So Leo is going to talk, and we have quite a large crowd today. I think there's going to be possibly 60 of us. So I would ask you to put questions into the chat box, and I'll be monitoring the chat box and I'll deal with the questions, pass them to Leo when he's finished speaking. And then after that, if you want to ask a question, make a comment, the best thing is just to turn off your mute and to come in and introduce yourself. Okay, so without further ado, I'll hand it over to Leo Appleton now. Thanks, Leo.
Okay, thank you very much, Helen, for that introduction, and thanks very much also to Helen for inviting me to do this session today in your Love Data Week, which I've entitled "Tell Us What You're Doing Using Library Data to Inform Scholarly Communications." So just a brief introduction. As Helen said, I'm Leo Appleton. By day, I am a senior teacher at the Information School in the University of Sheffield, but that's a post I've only taken up in the last year. Prior to that, I was a practicing librarian, and I'll tell you a little bit more in a moment. But for today, and I think why Helen's invited me, is in my capacity as the Editor-in-Chief for the New Review of Academic Librarianship, so that I can speak to you, I suppose, as somebody who's involved in scholarly publishing, and we'll think a little bit about the role that data plays in that. As I said, I'm into public libraries in the United Kingdom, which allowed me to pursue a passion, which was a PhD in the thing that I really like, which is libraries and the value and impact of libraries. So over the course of my 25-year career, if you like, I've written and presented widely on many aspects of library and information services management and provision. Examples include electronic resources, space design and planning, information literacy, user experience, performance measurement, quality assurance, library staff training and development, the value of public libraries, and leadership and management. Now that sounds like a lot. That is a lot of things to have written and presented on. But I make no apologies for that, because you have to have a little bit of self-promotion in this world of scholarship, and the reason I kind of featured that and a kind of overview of my career is because that becomes important, because it's your credentials, and when you do write, you need to get your credentials across. Your credentials validate why you, in particular, you as the individual or you as the group, are writing about that thing you're writing about. So credentials are all important. So first message, I suppose, is don't shy away from credentials. And then lastly, I've said I'm a researcher practitioner, so I have always been intrigued by being scholarly within my practice, or I suppose informing my practice as a librarian through research or through scholarship. And I've also been very professionally engaged. I do have a real passion for libraries, for the career I have, and for the jobs I do. So I've been really involved in CILIP, chairing CILIP special interest groups, been very involved in SCONL, which I'm sure you're all aware of, the Society for College, National and University Libraries, and when I was working in London, very active in the M25 consortium of academic libraries. So that professional engagement is also part of me and part of my credentials. So we are here to talk about scholarship and library practitioners such as yourselves, for those of you who are in this session who are practicing librarians. And the first thing I want to do is just throw out a question to you, is why should library and information professionals involve themselves in scholarship? And by scholarship, I mean, I suppose, contributing to publication or even presenting at conferences, really about telling other people what you do, as is the title of this session. So what I'd like you to do is everybody who's participating, just the first thing you can think of, if you could put that in the chat box for me, just tell me why you think library and information professionals should involve themselves in scholarship. Just to let you know, everyone will see what you put in the chat, so the chat's there for everybody. It's a little bit a way of everybody interacting. So if people could just share with us, for those of you who may not have done this before, you'll have a chat icon at the bottom of the screen. It's as simple as clicking on that and typing in what you think, or why you think library and information professionals should involve themselves in scholarship. Why shouldn't we leave it to the academics? So I'll just give you another few seconds as you just throw your ideas in there. Great, lots of ideas coming through here. Lots of suggestions. We've got to share and learn. We've got shared best practice. Practice what you preach, evidence-based practice. That's a great suggestion. Sharing knowledge, continual improvement, because we're all part of the scholarly information cycle. Need to participate, need to be active. More sharing, advance the profession. Highlight the value of libraries. So there's some advocacy there as well. A community of practice. Sharing practice, sharing through learning, through doing, professional development. Wonderful, brilliant contributions. Thanks very much, everybody. I wasn't expecting quite so many, and finally there from Michelle, walking in the shoes of the people we support. So having that shared experience with our academic colleagues. Well, there was no need for the next slide because I think you got them all. So there's my suggestions as why librarians should involve themselves in scholarship. And quite a few of the suggestions in the chat from yourselves was about sharing best practice. And I've always said, as practicing librarians in whatever sector, we are a service sector, we're a helpful sector. We want to help, and that's not just our immediate customers and users, but we want to help each other. And I think it's kind of in our nature, part of our values as librarians to want to share our good practice and our best practice. To contribute to the profession, because that's similar, it's just that sharing again. People mentioned professional development, and the other points I've got on the slide, which maybe people didn't pick up on, was recognition. So you would share what you do well, what you've done innovatively, what you've done creatively, share that and be recognized for it. And my bottom point on this slide, create reference points for your achievements in innovations, is again, don't shy away from what you do. Don't shy away from kind of promoting yourself or your library or your service or your team, if you're doing something particularly innovative and creative, then to capture it in a piece of scholarship and share it is great, because you'll get the recognition, but most importantly, you timestamp what you've done so nobody else can get the recognition later on, especially if you're pioneering something. And you don't always know that you're pioneering something, but that's why it's probably even more important to try and capture it when it happens. So I'm going to go fairly quickly because I do want to make sure we've got time for questions at the end. So let's acknowledge, which you all have with those wonderful suggestions in the chat, that we should be engaging in scholarship as practicing librarians. So what kind of publications should we therefore be writing for? What kind of things? So I think I realise that the people who are here with us today are probably a mix of people who may not have done any writing yet, and those of you who have written for different types of journal. So I've suggested here different types of publication that we may be drawn towards, or the thing that we're doing. Tell us what you're doing. It might be appropriate for you to go into, say, a peer-reviewed journal, which is probably the hardest piece of writing in terms of the scholarship that we engage ourselves with. Or we might think more along the lines of a newsletter, whether it's a local newsletter, a consortium newsletter, or the professional press. So my reference point for professional press is always SILIP's Information Professional, but publications similar to that. You may simply just want to blog, and you're still capturing and reflecting and time stamping your piece of work, your research, your creation, your innovation. It might be appropriate that it's more of a case study or an experiential piece or a thought piece. So you may consider a book chapter, and you might often see calls for contributions to book chapters. You may have enough for an entire monograph. You may want to set out and write a whole book yourself. And again, our professional publications, certainly, again, my reference point would be Facet. They're always keen to hear ideas for monographic contributions. Or it might be that you want to inform policy. So you might want to write a white paper or a report based on your experience or based on your research. So on the right-hand side of the slide, I've kind of broken down those different types of outputs. So the left-hand side is the kind of publications we could look out for, and there is a bit of a variation there, a bit of a variety. But the types of pieces, I won't necessarily go through this entire list, but if you've written an essay, you might consider that might make a good book chapter. If you've written a case study based on your practical experience, it might be that's more fitting towards the professional press rather than a peer review journal. Although that said, peer review journals are full of case studies as well. So you have to make an informed choice. Once you've done your writing, or once you've decided what you're going to write, you probably want to think about where you might publish that as well. So I want to come on to the reason why we are here today, because we're in a Love Data Week. Again, I think it's wonderful having a Love Data Week. So I really want to focus now on data, because there's lots of different types of writing that we can do, and I'll say a little bit more about that later as well. But we want to focus now on data, the data that we create as librarians, and what business has it doing in our scholarship? That's the next question I want to address. So again, you were all really good at this a moment ago. I'd like you to answer this question in the chat, and tell me, what different data do you think that library and information professionals collect and use, either habitually or for one-off purposes? What the kind of data and data sets that we're immersed in all the time as library practitioners? So if I give you, again, another 60 seconds or so, if you want to just try and capture in the chat your ideas for what are the data that we're using and we're collecting. And Tanya straight away said, usage statistics for everything, the Sconnell set, number of hours we teach, user metrics, catalogue metadata, usage figures, engagement metrics, resource downloads. Great ideas, or great suggestions. So qualitative data, let me just revisit that, interactions with students, and also quantitative data, usage statistics, Sconnell stats. Good to see the Sconnell stats coming out. I was on the working party that reduced the Sconnell stats from however many it used to be, 180 to I think only to 120 questions. but yeah, Sconnell stats are a kind of bread and butter to academic librarians in the UK and Ireland. So more suggestions, we've got circulation data, library footfall, class stats, how many attended, response rate in classes, so analytics from within your classes, excellent feedback after the class, take up of resources post the class. I really like that, thank you. That's a whole sequence of data that we may get from a single teaching session. Qualitative engagements on engagement, survey feedback, workshop feedback, survey data. Yep, I think LibQual, good mention of LibQual from Mary, and Michelle's contributed turnaways from e-resources, all statistics. And this is what I was saying before, when I used to shy away because I used to think it was all very statistical. But actually, these statistics are all about our business, all about our day-to-day. And then we've got need to capture experiential data as well as statistics, how the users feel, emotional responses. Fantastic, thanks everybody. Again, wonderful set of results, suggestions there. And again, let's see how well you've done for preempting my next slide. So this is when I asked the question to myself whilst preparing these slides: what different data did the library and information workers collect and use? And I think you've got all of those in the suggestions. Clearly, we love our usage data. We like to know who's in, what they're doing, you know, how many are in, how many different students from different faculty, different departments, how long they stay in. And then of course we have all our circulation data. So what are they borrowing? How are they borrowing? What are the trends? What are they accessing online? The turnaways, what aren't they accessing online? And then there's room bookings as well. So we can kind of start to get data about how libraries use, how our users use our spaces. We've got data, I've put data about services and resources. So that's the kind of how many, you know, the bigger, faster, how many catalogue records have we got, how many books have we got on the shelves, how many e-resources, but also that fits in with the budget data and how you derive value for money. So you set off what you own or what you have access to against what you're actually paying for it. Then we have survey data. So I've put all this together as quantitative data, but again, we want to gauge how people use and perceive and want to improve our services. We're all very, very user focused. We are a helping service. We're very service oriented. So we want to find out how our users are satisfied or how they perceive us as a service. So we can get quantitative data from those kind of user surveys that we do. We mentioned LibQual as well, get good quantitative data, excellent quantitative data from LibQual. Again, that's all about the perception, people's perception, user perceptions of the libraries. Analytics, where we use our usage statistics against another metric to map outcomes, and I put reading list data in there. We've got social media metrics. We would monitor our engagement with our Twitter accounts, with our LinkedIns, with our Instagrams. We would monitor, and again, probably get some quantitative data from there. And then UX, which is a fairly recent phenomenon over the last 10 years, that whole ethnographic approach to kind of getting student engagement and student feedback, user engagement and user feedback into our service. We can get quantitative data from there. So I would suggest anything you observe, you can quantify. Whereas we jump into the qualitative data side of the slide, and we get it's all the things that people would say about our services. So some of those tools, a survey, for example, or LibQual or a UX project, would give us both. It's a mix. They're a mixed method, so they give us both quantitative and qualitative data. So we'd use those comments and feedback when we run a focus group. Certainly, we would use the feedback as data. We probably all have comment schemes or suggestion schemes. Again, whilst they're direct comments to try and help develop the service, collectively they become qualitative data. Similarly, we can monitor the numbers of social media, but it's the things that our users say in the social media that, again, we could capture collectively, and that becomes qualitative data. I've suggested other things like staff surveys, library user groups, critical friends groups, module evaluations, national student survey. And I've consciously missed out UX, because actually UX is all about all of those things. You could use any number of methods within a UX methodology to develop both quantitative and qualitative data. So as we've got to here, both through your suggestions and hopefully my kind of thoughts about what different data do library and information professionals and library and information workers collect. There's a lot, and there are lots of different types of data that we collect, but there are also lots of different type of scholarship and writing that we can get involved in. And I suppose, again, it's about thinking about where does that data fit into the type of writing or the type of scholarship. And as a practitioner, I've written lots of different types of pieces. I've written literature reviews, I've written opinion pieces, editorials, thought pieces, blog posts, but largely, I would say mostly, lots of practice-based and evidence-based case studies. And all of those things were certainly the case studies, where I feel I've been innovative or done something different in the workplace. That was me time-stamping the work, kind of sharing good practice and wanting to be recognised for what we've done at the same time. And I suppose I've never really been too thoughtful, if I'm honest, about what I'm putting in there as evidence, or as it turns out, as data. I've also never really been too precious about where I've published. And I think that's a gift that we all have. Certainly from my perspective, if my writing doesn't have to contribute to the ref, which as a practitioner I wasn't associated or recognised as faculty, so it didn't have to be. There could be actually more choosy about where we wanted to publish, and that can affect how you write. So you don't always have to write at this top level academic standard of writing. You can pitch more at the professional press, or you can pitch a case study to a peer-reviewed journal. But I would occasionally find myself making quite considered judgments about where to publish because of the type of thing that I'd written. And if I felt I'd done a robust piece of work-based or evidence-based research, i.e. I had used or I had designed a questionnaire or a particular intervention, I would then have a search for what kind of journal, what kind of library and information science journal has published this kind of material from a practitioner or an academic, but this kind of case study or this kind of good practice. But a lot of the time I would just use my professional press. So the Sconnell Focus is something I'll talk about a little later on, which is a great channel, great quick channel for getting good practice and sharing best practice. Other times, if I felt I had actually developed a research method and what I was reporting on was robust, I would try and go for a peer review journal. But as I said, it's quite nice as a non-academic, for me it was anyway, to have more choice really as to where to publish. So what I want to do now is just share with you some examples of where, as a practitioner, I realise now that I've been using data in my scholarship, and then I want to share some other examples of where other library practitioners have used scholarship. So really now the next few slides are just going to be examples of where I've used scholarship. So to start with, I went back in ancient history, which you can all see me speaking now on the screen, and you can see that photograph of me in 2003, probably taken in 2002. This fresh-faced learning support advisor for health studies at Edgehill College. But this was my first publication, and what me and my boss Sue Roberts, who was the head of service at Edgehill College, which is where we worked. She encouraged me to contribute to this piece. She'd been approached by Serials, which was the publication of the UKSG, the UK Serials Group, as it was known at the time. And she'd been approached because they'd heard that we were doing something innovative with ebooks, and it was quite pioneering that we were using ebooks, and we were promoting them within the VLE. So in the early 2000s, that was fairly new. So I had this opportunity to write, and then when I look back over this article yesterday, I realised, so I've put some blue arrows on the screen there, that I was lifting data from the evaluation that we did at the time with the student nurses and student midwives, because that was my subject area. We were using the data generated from that evaluation to inform this particular piece of scholarship. So that got me thinking, well, maybe I have been inadvertently or subconsciously using this qualitative data. I am a qualitative person, all my writing career, and it transpires as I have, because if I move on a couple of years, there's a couple of other articles, and I've just picked these out just to demonstrate that I suppose I got into quite a good habit of wherever I thought I was doing something good or creative or innovative, I would think about actually how do I capture this after it and where might I publish it. So these were two early examples of where I had decided I'll just approach a peer review journal and see if they like my my papers. The first one was, again, my interest then was in electronic books and in supporting health education. Again, this time around, I got far more student data or student, I suppose, student perception of the ebooks, and I wrote a paper about the student perspective of ebooks, using again that qualitative data that I had pulled out of my work-based evaluation. When I moved from health libraries, I went into further education libraries, and this is a paper called Perceptions of Electronic Library Resources in Further Education. It wasn't really widely written about in further education. And this was a slightly different example. So I used my workplace as my field, but I was also doing an MA in education studies at the time. And I did my dissertation on staff and student perceptions of electronic library resources in further education. So I was then able to kind of adapt the MA thesis. It's only 10,000 word thesis, but adapt that into a paper for this peer review peer review journal, the electronic library. So again, all the time I'm using the data that I'm generating in the workplace to inform my contributions to scholarship. And then jump on 15 years, and I just looked at something I did recollect it because it was a wonderful project to be involved in. When I was head of library services at University of the Arts London, very creative institution, as I'm sure you can imagine, we did this really wide-scale UX project where we really focused on how we engage our students in library planning and library design. And again, there was lots of strands to this. Those of you who are familiar with UX, you'll be familiar with observations, heat maps, touchstone tools, and we did all of that as this quite a holistic UX project. But we also asked our engaged students to attend focus groups and keep reflective diaries. And these are just two examples of these rather creative reflective diaries that some of the participating students contributed. And again, it's only from kind of stepping back and realizing, well, this is data that we used to inform our service changes, but also this piece that I'm illustrating on the page here, which is for want of a better description, for me, it was a case study of a significant UX project that we did across a multi-site campus. So the data that we generated helped to validate what we were doing as a project, and therefore we shared that as best practice. So I wouldn't say this was a research piece, it's just still sharing of best practice, but we're still using the data that we generated. And then most recently, as I was doing my doctoral studies, I'm still, even though I'm now, I suppose, writing in those higher kind of higher level library and information science journal. So this piece in the Journal of Librarianship and Information Science from a couple of years ago, and this is part of disseminating my doctoral studies. But in this case, again, still lifting data out of the focus groups that I ran as part of my research method. So again, all that qualitative data, anything that anybody says about your service, whether it's students, library users, staff, it is all potentially data if you regard it as data and do some analysis on it in order to spot trends and create outcomes and discussion from it. So they were just a few examples. It wouldn't be fair if I didn't kind of share with you how I've used data, or how I now realized I've used data. For me, always qualitative, but that you'll all be involved in quantitative data and collecting statistics and metrics, etc. And in a way, it's just a different type of data, but it would still inform your professional practitioner scholarship. But I just wanted to say a little bit about the journal that I'm now the editor-in-chief of, and again, just to share how I suppose I stumbled across being editor-in-chief of the New Review of Academic Librarianship. I first got involved by writing a piece in 2013 about students' engagement, and the editor at the time recognised me from having written for Health Information and Libraries Journal a few years previously. So he just asked me if I'd be interested in reviewing any future papers, which I was quite happy to do. I think reviewing is the next stage on from writing for peer review, for you to contribute back to that whole cycle of academic publishing. And then after a few, I suppose, timely and half decent reviews, I was asked if I'd like to join the editorial board. Couple of years later, would I be an associate editor, which then starts me getting used to being an editor of a journal. And now when my predecessor decided it was time to step down, he passed the baton over to me. So I am now the editor of New Review of Academic Librarianship, and delighted that I've replaced myself with our own Helen Fallon, who's the new associate editor of the New Review of Academic Librarianship. But I've just put this list up because these in our aims on our webpage, these are the things that we will publish about, and I don't need to read them out. I think you only need to look down that list and realize they're things I do, or they're things we do in my library, in our team. And that's the beauty of the New Review of Academic Librarianship. It's practitioner oriented, practitioner focused. It's not to say we don't publish academic pieces or we don't welcome pieces from academics, but we're very much supportive and welcoming of any library and information practitioner in academic libraries who want to contribute a paper or want to submit a paper for review and for consideration. So it's one of several outlets, but I would obviously, I'm biased, but I would suggest it's a great outlet for academic librarians all over the world to convert their practice into scholarship. It's rigorous, it's robust, everything's double-blind peer-reviewed, but it's a good platform for us as a library practitioner community. And just by means of, I suppose, finishing this presentation, I've just got a few examples of recent papers that kind of fit the bill for the messages we're getting across here, how they've used data in their practice to contribute to scholarship. So the first example I have is a paper by Ashcroft, Bird, Bull, Harper, James and Robertson, where they've written a paper based on their project to move from subject-based teams to functional-based teams. So I'm not saying it's fairly common, but it's a fairly new phenomenon that we move from subject-based to functional-based teams. They're not necessarily the first to do it, but maybe the first to do it this way. So in this paper, they present a case study, but they also present the findings from the survey of their university staff, so outside of the library, but also a survey of staff from other institutions outside of their institution. And that validates the data, and that's really good because they're getting data from two sets. They're getting data from internally from their own university and externally by validating what they're finding internally, and they're validating that through qualitative data. So I thought that was a good example to share with you. The next one I have a paper by Anne Hayes, which is a paper around student usage, in particular LGBTQ students' usage of the library, and wanting to understand that particular user group's needs and be responsive to that particular group of students. So again, it's all grounded in practice, all grounded in wanting to develop and improve services. But in this, Anne has used a survey technique, and in that survey she's generated quantitative and qualitative data, which has helped to then inform the changes that she may have made to her service. It informs not only that, but it informs best practice and scholarship, because she's then gone on to publish it in the New Review of Academic Librarianship. Another one here, again about a UX ethnographic research project at the University of York. And again, Michelle and Vanya, when they wrote this piece, had some quite thorough open interviews with their academic staff in order to understand their needs and develop services. Again, they've converted this into a piece of scholarship to share that method and share that best practice. And then I thought I would tease out some recent Irish contributions to the New Review of Academic Librarianship. So there may be some familiar names here. We've got a piece here from Michelle Dalton, Alexander Kukar and Martin O'Connor, Many Voices, Building a Bibliogosphere in Ireland. I've said that wrong. And this is an example of a collaboration. So we've got 3 different universities here who've come together to evaluate a particular question they've got. Why do Irish-based library and information professionals blog? And they've generated data through open surveys to inform their inquiry and therefore contribute to this scholarship. Another one, a deselection process or collection management project at Maynooth by Elizabeth Murphy. And in this piece, you'll find data that's been generated from that deselection project, along with a thorough literature review, which would come as part of your turning your practice into scholarship. And that, again, that helps to validate. So you might be validating what you're finding in your project against what you're reading in the literature. And again, suggesting here sharing best practice in case the method that we used for this project is of use and can benefit other libraries around the world. And then final example, again, from our own Helen Fallon and Laura Connaughton, a small research piece where they've evaluated a World Cafe format as a mechanism for dialogue, and used the evaluation that they carried out at the end of this World Cafe event, used that evaluation to generate qualitative data, again validated by a literature review, so what they've read about it, what other people say about this format, validated by our experiences through our data, and again you've been able to inform your practice, but also share that good practice through capturing it and creating it into a piece of writing, into a piece of scholarship. So we're okay for time, so I'll just probably talk for another 5 minutes, if that's okay with everyone, and then I'll throw it open to questions. Just want to highlight places where you might publish. So some of the publications I've mentioned today, the Sconnell Focus, you may all well be familiar with that, an information professional from SILIP. And then there are 2 publications that I've recently become familiar with, which are Irish publications. This is going so well, so I'm not going to attempt the pronunciation, but the Irish Library, which I've had a look at, and it looks like a wonderful publication, quite a hybrid publication, which would be a great platform for publishing case studies and publishing those kind of local projects and sharing that good practice. And then there's the Journal of the All Ireland Society for Higher Education. Again, you can get into a bit more detail, so into, I suppose, more specific case studies, more specific discussions in that particular journal. There's my own new review of academic librarianship, but there are other, I would say, practitioner-led peer review journals, so we don't just need new review of academic librarianship. The Journal of Information Literacy has a very similar ethos and similar values to new review of academic librarianship, as does Library and Information Research. Now they're both run by special interest groups, or published by special interest groups of SILIP. So they are both open journals in that respect as well. And then 2 journals that have been good to me over the years, Health Information and Libraries Journal, and Insights, which is the new version of UKSG's open access publication. They're just a few suggestions of places you may approach to get started with. If you've not written for peer review before, there's some good suggestions for academic librarianship oriented peer review journals. And if you've not written at all before but want to get started, then some of those professional publications maybe where you would want to pitch in the first instance. I just wanted to end, well, there's 2 things to end with. One was I couldn't do this presentation without sharing these 3 resources, and I'm going to assume that these slides will be made available to everybody after the event. There's 3 particular resources I always suggest to people who want to get started in writing for publication. One's the Thing Explainer, which I'm going to tell you a bit more about in a minute. The second one is the Academic Writing Librarians blog, which Helen runs, Helen Fallon runs, and that's full of excellent insights and tips about how to get started in writing and how to write for publication. And then there's a similar resource called Writing for the Professional Press, which has been written by Anthony Brewerton. Some years ago, Anthony Brewerton's at University of Warwick. So I recommend just having a look at those if you're interested in writing for publication. I'm just going to dwell slightly on the Thing Explainer, which is Emma Coonan, formerly of the University of East Anglia. She basically put this really neat template together for what to write about. She called it the thing I did. This is the thing explainer. So bear in mind the presentation of this, sorry, the title of this presentation is Tell Us What You Did. This is a great way of telling us what you did. So you start with being, telling us about, here's the thing I did and this is why it needed doing. So that's the introduction. Here's what other people said about this thing that I'm doing, i.e. what the literature said. Here's how I did it. What did you actually do? The method. Here's what happened. So this is what I found. And this is what I think it means. And that's the discussion. And that, for a piece of scholarship, potentially academic writing, they're the 5 things you need. Here's the thing I did. Here's what other people said. Here's how I did it. Here's what happened. This is what I think it means. If you add those other things at the bottom, abstract, background, scope, ethics, and a conclusion, you're well on the way to actually an academic publication. And I just wanted to share that because I think it really simplifies how you can write about your practice and your good practice and capture it in that kind of reflective but also evidence-based way. And that's the end of my presentation. There are all the references that I've made reference to throughout the presentation. Obviously, they haven't actually informed my presentation because I've used them all as examples. But if you're interested in following up as examples, which we know have got some kind of data in them, practice-based examples, then please do follow that up. And just my one final word, because I haven't covered it in a slide, largely because I don't feel qualified and don't have the credentials to go into it in any detail, but you're probably interested in, if we're talking about data in GDPR and ethics, and of course if you were doing a piece of formal research approved by your university, it would be ethically approved. It would go through an ethics committee and there'd be a whole process, quite rigorous for that. And GDPR is different in that it's data protection law that applies to businesses that collect, store and use data belonging to citizens. But for us as practitioners, library practitioners, the data we're collecting is data that tells us about our service and what other people think about our service. And we're using it, we would always use our data for the greater good, I hope, to improve and develop our services. So we need to bear in mind both GDPR and ethics without necessarily having to go through formal ethics approval. And so when you're collecting data, if you're doing an evaluation or you're doing a survey or an interview or a focus group, you just have to be clear about why you're doing that and why you're collecting data, and most importantly, what it's going to be used for. So you get permission from anybody involved there and then, and that becomes informed consent. And that ultimately, hopefully, would mitigate any potential for kind of ethically dubious linkage later on. But we could probably talk about ethics and the impact of data collection on GDPR at length. But as I said, it's not necessarily an area I'm an expert in, so I didn't want to dwell on it too much, but thought I should make mention of it. And that is the end of my presentation. So as I think it's gone according to time, so it should leave some time now for questions. So I think Helen said she's going to chair the questions. If you've got them, do put questions in the chat.
Thank you very much, Leo. So while we're unsharing the screen, if anybody wants to put in a question, or when we're now back to the main group, there aren't any questions in the chat box as yet, but the reason for that is that people have been so mesmerized listening to you, Leo. That was absolutely fantastic. Thank you very much.
Oh, you're too kind.
Could I just ask, if anybody wants to ask a question, could you just unmute and say your name and give us your question?
Helen, hi, it's Michelle Breen here from the University of Limerick. Thanks very much, Leo. And
hi, Michelle.
We admire Maynooth for all that they're doing to keep our CPD on track this year. It's not easy, but so thank you for that, Helen. Leo, my question is about, you've already alluded to ethics. And sometimes I get kind of snared up in the whole idea that I should have gotten ethical approval or ethics approval before I take the very interesting work we're doing and write it up. And just will you comment on that a little bit? And I'm not looking for loopholes or ways around it, but just good practice if I go to the likes of your journal or other outlets to publish, please.
Yeah, no, sure, Michelle. And it's a strange situation, because I'm sure if I look back over some of those examples I've shared with you, where I've maybe used qualitative data from an exit survey, which would have been anonymized in the first place. It's just asking students to tell us what you think about a particular resource. Unless I'd have put on that the bit of paper or the information that this data will be used to inform something, then there is no permission there. And I think the only and yet I still would argue you could use it as qualitative data, because there's no it's not personal data and it can't be traced to any particular individuals. But I do think if with half an eye on maybe ultimately always publishing something, just to have a catch-all on your surveys, on your when you're engaging students in a UX project, when you're asking people for comments, that you could put make mention of this data, or what you write on this form will be used to help improve services and maybe used to share best practice. So I think you just, wherever possible, try and cover yourself. Obviously, if you're running a focus group or you're with an individual person in an interview, or getting feedback on a face-to-face basis, again, it's about being clear at the outset what you're going to do with what they tell you. And I appreciate that as practitioners, you go into those encounters with students with the sole purpose of improving the service. If you haven't thought about, I might write this up afterwards. So it is tricky, Michelle, but I do think what you're doing is, when you write for the new review of academic librarianship, you're sharing your best practice, you're sharing your experiences of that particular project or that particular intervention, and you're supporting it with data that was generated from it.
Thanks, Michelle.
Thank you.
And Michelle and her colleague Ciara McCaffrey have actually published a new review of academic librarianship. Thanks. Anybody else? Just unmute and give your name.
Hi, this is Helen Farrell from Maynooth University Library. Thank you very much for a really interesting talk, Leo. I hope this doesn't put you on the spot too much, but I am actually curious at a personal level what you found the biggest challenge for yourself was getting started on writing. Thanks.
Yeah, no, that's a great question, Helen, and something I'm comfortable with, so it's better. Very happy to answer. I think when I did get started, I was probably quite naive, and I don't think I really appreciated the robustness of the peer review process when I was submitting for peer review, and also in a way that helped me, because when I got my peer review comments back telling me how awful the first version was, I wasn't really bothered, and I just thought, oh, well, I'll do what the experts are telling me to do, and submit a revision. And so that's, whilst it wasn't a challenge, but I suppose it was getting used to that. So having your work critiqued and reviewed, and then I always try and teach or ask reviewers to praise the article as well as critique it or criticize it. They need the criticisms so they know how to improve the article, but we need to wrap those critiques up in highlighting what's good about the article. So that's a challenge once you start with the peer review. But the biggest challenge that I have still now is just finding time. In fact, that's become a bigger challenge. The older I've got, the more children I've got, that kind of thing, the more responsibility I've had. So time is tough. So I make a concerted effort to try and attend. I actually try and attend a writing retreat every week now, at least 2 or 3 hours. My institution, Sheffield's brilliant for doing online writing retreats during lockdown, and various parts of the university. So the library's one of them, and a couple of research institutes. They all do writing clubs, writing retreats, and I find them just useful. I put that in my calendar. It's undisturbed time, so I know I'm going to get 2 or 3 hours a week to write whatever I'm writing, because otherwise I wouldn't write.
Thank you.
Thanks, Helen. Anybody else, if you want to give your name and your question?
Helen, can I come in there?
Yes.
Hi Leo, thanks a million, and to colleagues in Minute there, brilliant programme and really interesting talk. Leo, maybe picking up on Helen's last question, that maybe slightly more personal approach. I'm interested in your experience as a senior library leader and using data for some of those internal conversations or agenda setting internally. Have you kind of found that useful, particularly when people mightn't understand what libraries do, but data is something that they might be more used to thinking about? Have you any kind of insights on using that sort of data for that kind of strategic work internally with your internal stakeholders?
Absolutely, Joanna. That's a brilliant question, because in a way, if you're involved, I suppose, at any level of the academic library, where whatever data you're collecting, you're doing it to have an impact. And I would always used to question, well, why are we collecting if we're not going to do anything with the data that tells us value for money on electronic resources? Why are we bothering with it if we're not going to do anything with the data that tells us how many chairs we've got in the library, which is you have to report that to Sconnell? Well, we've got to make that useful and impactful for us. So I would always inform anything I wrote to my seniors in the libraries I've worked in, would always been informed by both statistical data and qualitative data. And interestingly, I've found that actually, as a practitioner, making a case internally can actually be strengthened and validated if you can point to some publications that you've had in that field based on data that you've generated from that institution. So I would just make just use the data for as much as you can.
I like that idea of actually referring to your peer-reviewed publications, because it's demonstrating again that sense of the sectoral expertise that you're bringing to the table, and that it's data informed, like every other academic discipline. Which
absolutely.
Great, thank you, Leo. Really enjoyed that.
No problem.
Thank you, Joanna. Anybody else? If you say your name again. We're actually now at 10 to 1, so we'll be wrapping up shortly. So maybe I will ask a question. Well, first of all, can I say something which really struck me? Many things struck me, but don't shy away from credentials and recognition. I really think as librarians, we have to do that. We have to tweet about our work, etc. And to be honest with you, even I found that difficult to do, you know, the kind of, you feel a bit like, oh, see my latest article at, you know, whatever, and you feel a bit like you're blowing your own trumpet, but we do have to do that or we will get left behind. And we also have to be in the view of our research offices in the university, and we need to have ORCID IDs, etc. So that's just an observation, and I'm glad you mentioned that we need to get loud. In fact, I think that Librarians Get Loud was the title of something or other. It might have been something you were involved in, even Leo. But I wanted to ask a practical question. Many of us in Ireland started off writing for An Leabharlann, which comes out twice a year, and Sconnell Focus. And really, we haven't heard of Sconnell Focus in a long while. There's different stories about what's happened to it. I don't know if you have any insights, Leo, or is there any way we in Ireland can help to, you know, revitalise it or whatever?
No, the last I heard, Helen, was it's not gone away, but they've not worked out how it's going to move forward. So that's the last I heard, but that's been the case for about a year. And I did just double check. So I think but they did publish an issue early last year, I think. But it's been a go-to for me throughout my career. It always had a wonderful format. And I just wonder, it probably is just worth individual inquiries to the Sconnell office to ask where it's gone, because it's a place I always encourage people to start off with. So,
yeah. No, it would be good. But it's great to also see the other resources you highlighted. Now, I have a few people I want to thank, and then we'll finish up. Well, first of all, I have to thank Leo for a really excellent talk, which I think we've all gained so much from. So thank you for that, Leo.
No, it's a pleasure.
I want to thank Elaine Bean, our events manager, for all the work behind the scenes. And I want to thank Fiona Morley, who's brought us a wonderful Love Data Week. And I want to thank all of you in the audience for coming at lunchtime. So hopefully you'll have time to get something to eat now. So bye for now, and thanks again. It was great.
Thanks very much, everyone.
Thanks, Dan. Thanks, Leo. Great talk.
Thank you, everyone, and thanks for the good reception. Appreciate that.